John, the famous UK conspiracy theorist David Icke claims that climate change is part of a political agenda originally developed by the Club of Rome, which was set up in 1968, that aimed to use the environment to transform society and centralize power, as he claims that in order to save the planet from global warming, we need to have centrally controlled approach to it. So, in other words, to set up a worldwide dictatorship. What's your opinion on this? Has the climate change got any political agenda, you think?
Well, scientists are not noted for having a political agenda. In fact, it's very difficult to persuade scientists to say anything about policy in public, and that's been one of our communication difficulties over the past few decades. But at the end of the day, we're arguing with thermometers. There's no doubt that climate is changing, and it's changing rapidly. Our millions of thermometers are telling us that. Our climate models are telling us that. So I think we have to divorce all of these, the political mumbo-jumbo from that, and just the reality is that we face a crisis, and the crisis is a crisis of our own doing, and a crisis which will only be solved by ourselves. I don't subscribe to the conspiracy theories. It's very easy to gain publicity from being sensational about such theories, but in this instance, the reality is the evidence on the ground, the evidence of changing ice sheets, the evidence of our thermometers changing, our biodiversity changing. There's just no way of getting around the fact that science is telling us a very clear signal that climate is changing, it's our fault, and we have to do something about it quickly. And that's where I think we should end this argument in a sense, because diversions into conspiracy theory are just nonsense in my view.
So you think like claims that originally this topic was kind of imposed on the scientific community is false statement?
It's completely false. The scientific community...
So it was bottom-up approach rather than the other way
Yeah,
around,
the scientific community is globally doesn't fall for that kind of thing. So I think we can dismiss it. 2 planes now. There's one here as well.
It is a relevant question insofar as the applied side of coastal shoreline studies is about where people live. And so if you're denying that sea level rise at the present moment and our acceleration of the rate of sea level rise to 3 to 4 millimeters, which has never been, is the highest it's been in the last 2,000 years in the Northern Hemisphere. So isn't it a clear acceleration? And the question is, well, why is it accelerating then if it decelerated before? The answer to that is climate warming. Not entirely.
So basically you think there's no political agenda behind?
I'm coming to the political agenda. The political agenda, which is the wider picture as to why people would dispute the work of the IPCC, for example, is the human story. It's an economic investment story. That big industry, its object is to create money and to concentrate money and wealth. The process of our concentration of wealth is always in a capitalist system to concentrate it in a few hands. So our big manufacturers, with vested interest in continuing to make money without real investment to retool, rechange, restyle, restructure industry, which will cost them money, is to say, well, it doesn't exist, does it? The other aspect, of course, of this is that humans don't like the idea of change. The more conservative we are as human beings, the less, even less, we like the idea of change. And I must say that most of those that are climate deniers are very conservative, reactionary type of people. And so they're not the most open to the innovations of science, to the most modern parts of technology. I'm being provocative here, of course, but in my estimation, those that are real climate deniers have a very distinctive vested interest in saying, we don't want to change, we don't want to accept that. Whether it be the oil and the coal industry in the United States, which has driven the political decision of Donald Trump to make the sort of statements that he's made, is because it's politically useful for him to come on the backs of reactionary, somewhat vested interest type of industry, which doesn't immediately want to change. And for the bulk of people that are out there that are asked to vote yes or no, the bulk of people don't know, because they don't do what I do or what you do or what science allows us to observe. They are consumers of information. Most people, including me, I don't know anything about that camera, apart from how to switch it on, often not even how to turn it off. So I'm ignorant about the electronics of a camera. I would also say, therefore, many people are ignorant about what sea level change is, or about all the detailed processes by which that works. Now, I spent, as you pointed out, 40 years or more, not unique in that. There are lots of other people that have done the same thing, but we have a detailed knowledge of how this environmental system of us, our planet, works.
So basically conspiracy theories which deny climate change, it's just because of the ignorance of people who develop them.
They are vested interests of human beings that, for varieties of the complex ways in which we work as human beings, our motives are not always obvious. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad. But we have different motives for what we say and how we say it. The point about science, in its best sense, is trying to be as objective with the factual material that shows how things work, what things are, how reality is in physical terms. So what I'm concerned about is that the science tells me that the environment is changing in a way that it's not changed before, and the cause of that is due to people, and we best learn from that knowledge if we wish to survive, because what we can see from that climate change, mirroring with analogue to past change in past geological time, is that when the processes of degassing, for example, from the Earth, or a meteorite impact has happened, then equally very large-scale climate change has taken place through related processes, but not the ones we're now experiencing, but related processes, which has forced temperature of the atmosphere up above a critical level of 4 to 5 degrees Celsius. Life on Earth changes radically. And so if we are forcing climate to warm to a point above the 4 degrees level, and some would argue even lower, then biology as we know it will change. In the Permian, 250 million years ago, temperatures rose above that critical 5 degree level. In fact, they rose to 10 degrees warmer than we now have. Life on Earth was exterminated. 98% of all organic life as we know it died. The 2% survived. And if we take the evolutionary example from Darwin, everything else on planet Earth has derived from that remaining 2 to 5% of remaining organic life after the Permian, and evolved into the life forms we have now. Now we have another curveball that in the Cretaceous another thing happened which did exactly the same thing and winnowed life in a different way. So we have those climate changes. Those equally are real. They're equally part of science. But those that argue for this are totally aware of all of that. This is not what we're talking about. This is human-induced climate change. And even if it wasn't, it's still warming in a way that we've not experienced it in our historical lifetime in the last 100, 200 years.
Are these theories about contemporary climate change, global warming, take into account the solar activity?
Yes,
because
of course.
Could this warming be due to kind of increased solar activity in the last 50, 100 years?
The balance of looking at all of the information coming from cosmology, if you'd like to describe it, from information coming from space, is no. It's as simple as that. No, it isn't.
It's not due to solar activity.
These are all not in itself due to solar activity. It's not to say that solar activity hasn't a part to play in modifying rises and falls of temperature in the atmosphere. It does. Solar activity may well be part of interpretation of, for example, the El Nino, the sudden oscillation in the ocean, of warming and cooling of the ocean through linking atmosphere to ocean, linking it to the El Nino warming response. All of that could well be stimulated, or the actual cause, by sunspot activity and solar flares. That's another branch of science, but all of that is understood in the sense that it happens, it can contribute, but that isn't itself the cause of warming. And the only relevance of this sort of study is what's driving sea level change from a coastal point of view, or a storm's point of view. What's driving the change in our storminess patterns? What's driving the change in the erosion rates? So if our low-lying areas where 60% of the world's population lives, in cities, civilization is concentrated, always has been, within the low-lying city areas of the Earth, that these are likely to be flooded if sea level accelerates again and continues to rise, to release the store of land-locked water that has yet to go into the oceans. So 115,000 years ago in the last interglacial, sea level was approximately 2 meters on average above present-day levels. So climate has warmed in the past to melt out past ice, and it's continuing to go in that. All we've done is accelerate the process by industrialization. So it's going in that direction. It would have continued to go in that direction, very probably, unless our quaternary glacial interglacial cycles, and this was a short one, and we'd have gone back into a glaciation and therefore back into a lowering of sea level. What we've done by industrialization is accelerate probably a fairly average interglacial and kicked ourselves out of the glacial interglacial cycle and pushed us into a warmed planet Earth such as we experienced in the Cretaceous when the dinosaurs were about. That's maybe what we've done with our industrial processes, which means that all of our glacial store, which has yet to go back into the oceans, under global warming. Now, if we melted out Antarctica, Greenland, and all of the land-based ice, including the permafrost, we're looking at about 60 meters rise of sea level above present-day levels, possibly more. And that's not even allowing for isostatic compensations as the water loads the Earth's crust and does all of this crustal flexing that will go on as well. And we could even see much larger sea level changes as experienced in past geological times, as that ice store has come out of frozen state and into the active Earth system of planet Earth. So these changes again have gone on. So my concern about all of that stuff, which is terribly fascinating, and it is, but its relevance is, are we at the beginning of pushing us into a non-glaciated state of planet Earth? And my hunch, more than an empirical science-based evidential feeling on this one, is because the evidence isn't there. We haven't monitored what's going on long enough. But my hunch is that we've pushed ourselves out of our glacial interglacial cycles of glaciations, and we've pushed ourselves back or on into the next phase of the Earth's environment, which we've actually called it geologically now the Anthropocene. We've recognized geologically in our naming of Earth's rocks and events and timescales, we've called it no longer the Quaternary, the period of ice, the Pleistocene and the Quaternary, but we've named it the Anthropocene, the time of Earth dominated by people. Hence, everything on the planet Earth is being interpreted through the lens of human beings. And coming back, the significance of that for our coast and people is this is where we now live. This is where the bulk of the Earth's population lives. This is where the economic hubs of civilization are. This is where our bread baskets and our rice baskets are, in the coastal zone. And if we are facing into sea level rise, there's no point in denying it. You've got to do something about it. As I said, it doesn't matter why. It's the question, is it? And the answer to that one is yes, it is. It's rising. It's now accelerating. I've never experienced it. It's always been stable, 1 to 2 millimeters rise. And as we look back in the paleoenvironmental record, that's what it's been like for 2,000, maybe sometimes 3,000 years. So this is the first kick up that we've seen for a long period of time. And the question to that is, why has it started to go up when it should be flatlining? And the pattern of the past is that it's moving towards flatlining, but it's not. It's rising. So the question is, why? And more interestingly, is it going to continue to go up? And the answer to that question from our science is it's going to continue to go up exponentially.